Then another argument that they use, coming down to the last two now, this one throws you off a little bit sometimes. They argue and they say, well, what would be the harm? See, we're going to continue doing this and promoting the gay rights movement until you come up with something that is so harmful to society, should gay marriage be accepted in all 50 states, that therefore, if you can't stop us, we're going to just plow ahead. If you can't stop us by showing, here's the harm that would cause society, and then we'll stop. But if you can't bring up anything that would harm the society, then we'll keep going. What do you say to that? Excuse me?
Say look at Rome.
Look at Rome? Okay. Like I said last week, don't preach my sermon for me. all my questions are rhetorical. So. That's a good thought. What would it harm? Let me answer that in two ways. Number one, the burden of proof is not on us. It's on you. And until you first show that there's a reason for this, that those rights really exist, and that this behavior is normal and not a perversion, so it's right to normalize it, you don't put any burden of proof on us to stop you. You don't even start it in the first place until you can meet your initial burden of proof. That's one way to attack it. The other way is this. What harm would it cause is only one filter to pass something through. It's not even the most important filter. Here's the most important filter. Is it nature's definition of what a marriage is? Let me give you an illustration. You know, I feel like every time I give an illustration, I'm grossing people out, but this will gross you out even worse. Let's suppose we have a guy, and he's having sex with a vacuum cleaner. And this is for a purpose. And let's suppose, for the sake of, because of what we're interested in here, it's, I'm sorry? Now you're not sorry enough for saying that. And just to make sure that he's not hurting anybody, let's suppose it's his vacuum cleaner. So now you have a guy and a vacuum cleaner, right? And I come to you and I say, I'm plowing ahead and I want this to be considered a legal marriage in this country, and the only way that you can stop this is if you show that if this becomes a marriage, the society will be hurt in some way. What's wrong with that? It doesn't sound right. Here's what the problem is. You don't do it if it hurts somebody. Yes, that's one filter you pass it through. But the most important filter to pass it through is this. Does it make sense to call it a marriage? And you don't do it if it's utterly preposterous and it doesn't make sense to call it a marriage. Or to put it in even better terms, we express it this way. Is it nature's definition of what a marriage is? A guy and an animal is not nature's definition of what a marriage is. That doesn't start a family. A guy and a vacuum cleaner is not nature's definition of what a marriage is. And a guy is not nature's definition of what a marriage is. So because all of those are preposterous, we don't do it even if you can't think of any harm to the society. And then one final thing, and I couldn't wait to get to this one. And I'll bet you can't either, because I'm sick and tired of this. What's that?
We're waiting.
Oh.
You have to write it down to remember it.
People on our side of this issue are constantly accused of having a psychological problem, because they use the term homophobe, homophobic, homophobia. In other words, anybody that stands against this, you have a mental deficiency. Now let me be the first to say this. Anybody, as I said last week, who is interested in harming, harassing, hurting, hating anybody else, a homosexual or anybody else, I have no problem you putting that label homophobic on that person. Nobody, and especially if you're a born-again Christian, You can't be a spirit-filled Christian and hate anybody and want to harm or harass anyone. Okay? So let's leave those people aside. The vast majority of people on our side of this issue don't want to harm, harass, or hurt anybody or hate anybody. Okay? The vast majority of people on our side of this issue simply look at the behavior and say this: that's intensely abnormal, we shouldn't normalize it. That's all they're concluding. They don't want to harm anybody or harass anybody. And so I think it's unfair to put a psychological accusation against the majority of people on our side of this issue. In fact, I would argue this: it's rational to say, if it's intensely abnormal, we don't normalize it. But now let's do something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and that's this. Let's take the, I don't even know what I'm going to draw here, but let's take the arrows and turn them around and point them finally in the right direction on who really has a psychological problem here. It's not the vast majority of people on our side of the issue. And what I'm going to say, I'm not talking about homosexuals themselves. What I'm going to say about who really has a psychological problem, I want to talk about the people who are gay rights advocates, many of whom are gay, many of whom are not. Who has the psychological problem? A gay rights advocate is someone who looks at the behavior of a homosexual, sees that it is a disgusting, unnatural abuse of the waste system of the human body, it's unsanitary, it's unhealthy, and this person says to himself, it's going to be a cause in my life to take this behavior, and I'm going to make it a major part of my life to convince the world that this is normal behavior. Excuse me, but what drives that behavior if it's not a psychological problem? Who really has the psychological problem? People that look at this gross, disgusting, unnatural, abusive, unhealthy, perverse sexual behavior and say, I don't want to normalize that, or the people who say, I do want to normalize this behavior. It's time to turn the arrows around and point them in the right direction. They're the ones who are delusional. They're the ones who are irrational, not people on our side of the issue. Let me close. That sounds like I'm near the end, doesn't it? No, I really am. By broadening this very principle out a little bit, I want to close by saying this. It's like when Paul says, finally in Philippians, he's only halfway through. So that takes us to, I'm getting hungry. All political correctness is intellectual suicide. And this gay rights issue is no exception. And why is it that every politically correct position is intellectual suicide? Because they don't arrive at their conclusions through logic. They arrive at their conclusions through an illogical means. They want to live in a fantasy world, an unreal world of equalities that they wish the real world was like, a leftist utopia, a world where everybody's equal, a dream world that cannot exist and cannot be forced on the real world. And out of this desire that the world was completely different than the way it is, they try to force things in the real world to fit their fantasy world. They're taking the round peg of the real world, so to speak, and fit it in the square hole of their fantasy world, and it never makes any sense. And this is just one example of them trying to do that. They want to live in a world where women are just as strong as men. It's a biological fact that women aren't as strong, but they want equality, even whether it fits the real world or not. They want to live in a world where homosexual sex is just as normal and natural as heterosexual sex. They wish the world were like that. They're delusional. The world isn't like that, and you can't force it into the real world. And that's why, ask yourself if this is true or not. Whenever any politically correct position is defended, they can't do it by argumentation or any honest argumentation. They always do it, listen now, by intimidation. Why is it always sarcasm? Why is it always trying to make a buffoon out of the person who doesn't agree with them? Why is it always vilification and mocking and ridicule and mudslinging and never talking about the issues in any honest way? Because they can't win any argument that's an honest argument. And when they do that, they're not only telling you to think less of the person that they're vilifying, but listen now, this is their real strategy. What they want to tell you is this: if you dare step out of line, what we just did to that guy, just smeared him all over the place, we're going to do it to you. So you sit there, keep your mouth shut, and don't tell us how irrational our position is. And they enforce political correctness in all of its forms by intimidation, never by honest argumentation. It's about time we stand up and say, I don't care what name you call me. Your idea is irrational. I don't care what you call me. I'm not going to go along with it. The emperor has no clothes. I'm going to get up and say that, and I don't care what the consequences are to me. And by the way, once you don't care what somebody calls you, they're out of ammunition. Because that's all they've got. That's all they've got. Now let me give you my final illustration. Suppose I was a visitor in a mental institution. A visitor now. After these two tapes, might put me in there. And I'm walking down the hall and visiting the different rooms, and one of the patients got up. And he started screaming at me and jumping up and down on his bed and pointing his finger and calling me all kinds of names. Would I change my mind about anything I think when I saw that? I don't think so. I might be amused at it, but I wouldn't be intimidated by it. I might think, poor fellow, he's delusional. That's what I think about politically correct people, gay rights advocates, and the rest of them. They're in this delusional world of unreality. And they're standing up and calling me names? What do I care what name they call me? They're the ones who are not with it. They're the ones with the problem. In the book of Timothy, Paul says to Timothy, one of the things that God does for us is give us a sound mind. And this book gives us a sound mind in thinking about every issue that it touches. And we don't have to doubt one bit, no matter how much we may initially be intimidated by some argument of the gay rights movement. This has got the right answer. We can trust it.